Hello, everyone, and welcome to Gerg and Muxl, a podcast that seeks to explore the unexplored topics of games, how they work, and why we love them. What follows is our review of the game Perfect Dark that we played through on our Twitch channel. You can check that out at twitch.tv/Gerg and Muxl or our YouTube channel by the same name. We hope you enjoy our concluding thoughts.
So outside of the strange 1990s obsession with, like, secret agent women.
Yeah, spy sort of things. It's kind of like a holdover from the Cold War, I think, in that way.
What? Are you serious?
Yeah, I mean the fact that like spies and
spies. Okay, I was talking about women. I was like secret agent women.
Women are really just kind of a leftover thing
from the Cold War. Yeah, we all remember when.
Didn't used to have.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right in terms of that, like, aesthetic. Like, I mean, it's very James Bondy.
Yeah.
Interesting.
A little less like
19 spiritual successors. Okay, so it was the same guys that did Goldeneye.
Yeah, that being that.
I mean, yeah, kind of had to be. Yep. All right. Upgraded version of the same engine, single player mode, difficulties, multiplayer, cooperative, deathmatch, yada yada yada, widescreen support, and surround sound.
Yeah, I would say that probably like the audio-visual stuff was some of the more polished things in that game.
I was wondering if the frame rate was because of where we were playing it, but its inconsistent frame rate was an often issue.
Yeah, well, especially when there's like explosions and things. It was very ambitious, I think, as a title.
Yeah. Well, I think too. Yeah, the customizableness. Yeah, it's interesting. 2001. Best product. Legacy, sister title, Velvet Dark. Interesting. All right. Well, what were your big takeaways? Or maybe we should save that for the end.
No, I think we talked about takeaways. I think I kind of knew this going in, but just like the control scheme is like super.
Yeah.
It's important in a game.
Yeah.
And I think the weirder thing for me is just how little it bothered me before I knew anything else.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? That it's very possible we'll look back on the Halo control scheme and be like, what in the... Okay, maybe that's not true. I feel like it would require I don't know, man. You think we'll ever think that way? Unless we had a four-joystick... Like, the reason that made sense is because they added a joystick, and then suddenly everything made sense. Right? Like we were saying, the control scheme with one joystick, the way it was actually probably optimized.
Yeah. And I remember trying. So I liked getting headshots in Perfect Dark when I was little.
Yeah, really.
I used to like bump the C stick and it would decrease my aim, but it would inch up my reticle a little bit, and I could try to get headshots, and that's what I really enjoyed challenging myself with when I was still playing the game.
And there was definitely a level of it wasn't fatal enough. Like I could definitely see how aiming well would get me kills faster, right? Particularly depending on the weapon. I mean, like you gotta spray and pray with the what was it called? The Cobra? No, the
Cyclone?
The Cyclone, right.
Sure.
But even just for like the semi-autos or even some of the weaker autos, like you require you to stay on target, and if you were to bump it up and do a headshot, it would probably be close to medium. So it's cool, like the even just the scaling there was still a thing, was correct. I was thinking too, like, what would that game have if it's hard to apply something as labyrinth as how online would affect things. It's not quite as simple as just one-to-one because it would affect so many different things. But how would that game work online? Like, try to compare it to like modern day Call of Duty, Halo, the FPSs of
it's
today.
Pretty fast paced, and I think it would just be made really fast paced by online play.
You know what it reminded me of a little bit?
What?
In that regard, in terms of like modern day,
closer
to. Well, no, that's not true. Maybe it was just the graphics and the clunkiness and it reminded me more so of Overwatch and the pace of play than like Call of Duty.
Yes, I would say that's accurate.
In terms of that might just be spawn locations.
Low punishment for death.
Yep, and pretty frantic firefights. Obviously, not nearly as many abilities, but like a lot of it because you get guns from locations instead of like spawns. It felt like more objective, like location based, where you go to different areas and your locational location. Woo! Your where you are obviously has a great deal of how you're going to be interacting, as well as just the different types of guns that really do actually force you to play slightly differently depending on what you have. The proximity mines in particular are real fun. But I don't know, Call of Duty, that might just be a scale thing too, or COD maps are so much bigger.
Yeah, that's
nowadays.
true.
But even, I don't know, even then, like, there's a really tiny, the current Call of Duty, the World War II one, I think it's just COD World War II, is it?
Yeah.
Oh, no, Black Ops 4 is out. Crap, it's not current anymore. Good lord. Anyway, World War II was the last one I played. And they have one map that is, like, you can almost literally spawn on top of the other team. There's, like...
Really?
It's pretty fun. It's just like a storage yard with, like, box shipping containers. So there's just little lanes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, you die and you live for an average of, like, 10 seconds tops.
Oh, my gosh.
But
that feels more like what we just played.
But even I was just thinking, it sounds more like it, but it didn't feel more like it. And I don't know why.
Well, that's a good question.
Yeah.
Because positioning doesn't.
We haven't talked much about FPSs on the cast.
No, we haven't. Yeah. We've done a couple of episodes, but positioning.
It does make me want to play Halo though.
Really?
Make you want to play? I don't know.
Yeah, well, maybe we'll get Halo next.
Did you ever play through the original Master Chief Edition where you could switch back and forth from the original graphics?
Yeah, I played it once.
To the Halo Reach graphics. I think it was Reach, or was it? It might have been 4 graphics. Anyway, the super modern from the originals, and it was literally press of a button.
Yeah,
so fun.
Really
Loved
cool.
doing that.
It was just so. That was so showy of them to put that in, where you could just toggle between the two.
Well, yeah, because
the contrast really heightens. Like, oh my gosh, look at how much they've improved.
Oh, you remember what they did? It was literally they just ran both games on top of each other.
Oh, did they?
At the same time. Yeah, you're not switching anything. You're just literally switching like the feed. Like you're not updating. Yeah, so they're both running permanently. Because like the original CE had such. I mean, it takes up so little space.
Yeah,
in terms of the processing power that it literally just ran both games under it. And so you're playing both at the same time. You can just switch between them. But that was slick. Anyway, point is,
one of the things I wanted to talk. Well, what was your?
I didn't have a point.
Okay. Yeah, you want to play Halo Combat Evolved?
Yeah, I do. Yes, I do want to play it. It's a good game.
So aiming is such an important part, and just learning how to aim is such an important part of shooting anyway. And that's a lot of what the game is learning how to aim well and how to shoot people well. And so. Yeah. The fact that was difficult, it didn't really detract from the gameplay as much because it's already something that you're that is part of the challenge, right? Is to be able to shoot something.
Well, it's so interesting too, even just in terms of scale. Again, outside of the map scale, how many weapons? There are probably 15 weapons total.
There's a few more unlockable. I would say there's 20 and 25, which is a pretty impressive collection for that time period.
But anyway, just compare that to a modern game too. However many tens of thousands of combinations of perks and abilities and attachments and weapons on top of maps, on top of game modes, that was all we had. You know, that was the top of the line shooting combat. Did people play? As before online, so obviously there was less. But did people play less games? Would you have played that by yourself against AI?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I would have too. It's so relatively simple, and yet we got so much mileage out of it.
Yeah.
So that to me makes me wonder: is it just a level of kind of continual exposure to complexity makes you just desensitizes you as you go on? You just want more and more stimulation, or is there a level of there was a simpler game design that was legitimately as engaging and deep as the super complex multiplayer game modes that we have today, or experiences?
I think it's more the latter. Most of the complexity that comes from a lot of these multiplayer games actually comes from the people that you're playing with. Right, which isn't still the case when I play with you. Yeah. Right? It's we get to strategize together, even when we're on the same team. It's you accidentally blew me up a couple times. I shot you a few times.
No, I shot you. Did you shoot me?
Yeah, I definitely.
Okay, I got you with the Magnum.
But even I think that the complexity really a lot of times comes from the people and not as much from the gameplay. In fact, I think when it's decent gameplay, the complexity doesn't get in the way a lot. You can take advantage of it when you need to, but it's not something you're always having to manage, unless it's something like an RTS where managing complexity really is the game.
It's so different. There's no bars to fill. This might sound. I don't know. I want to be careful of not being too revisionist or too rosy retrospection. But when I even today, when I sit down, I wasn't my roommate had World War II, and I just played it a few times with him. And even then, because I made my own little account, like, just the feeling of experience and raking up, like, that's why I would play multiplayer matches. It was, like, a little bit for the, like, objective, like, playing the fun of it, but, like, I wanted to be, like, leveling up my class, like, getting this gun, and, like, leveling up this attachment. And there's zero of that in this.
That's true.
Exactly, precisely zero. And
people would still... Things,
I mean, yeah.
Level up or anything.
That's true, you had the cheats. But at the same time, how many, like, it's just such a inherently different... like part of my brain that's being switched on for this, I was really just playing it for fun, really quite purely, and that doesn't. I mean, it's very rare. I feel like it might be very rare to have anything that's not objective based in a game nowadays.
Yeah, the objectives and achievements and goals have really. It's gone. They've really turned it up to 11, I guess. Like there was a time where
that's not an inherently bad thing, I don't think. But there's something like oddly refreshing about like I had zero. If I boot up that game again, it would not be to make more progression in my multiplayer. It'd be because playing the multiplayer was fun.
Right.
And that still exists. I mean, that still exists. But like, and I would say too, even with Call of Duty, primarily, the game has to be fun to fill up your bars. But yeah, like even like when I like again, I really enjoyed that. I played a lot of a few years ago. God, probably many years ago now. The original Titanfall was the last probably FPS that I played like semi-seriously.
Right.
And I loved that game, and it was similar in terms of it had a lot of it was simplified in terms of it had less things than a Call of Duty game, but it had a very similar kind of modern FPS progression system in terms of leveling up your character and weapons and builds and all that jazz. And I just remember every single time logging in that I would be very hyper aware. Like I'd be very hyper aware of what I was going to be doing, what my goals were for that session in terms of what I was going to be leveling. And I'd be playing the matches, and within the matches, I'd have the kind of little microcosm of trying to achieve well within the match, but in large part, I'd be very aware. I had to feel like I'd done something before and after, and I would reflect on what I'd done and like where I was going to go, or what my next goal was, or how long that would take.
Right.
Which, like I said, I don't think it's inherently bad. It's certainly good for bringing you back.
Yeah.
But there is something, I don't know. I don't want to just reduce it all to those simpler times, but like it kind of was.
Well, there were games where you could get what you're talking about, right? There were still RPGs, there were still games that were very level-based.
Yeah.
It's just that they didn't feel the need to mix all those different incentives to play, right?
Yeah. So not every single game needed that. In fact, that was a very niche thing, right? That was like for the super nerds who would be that into that many customizable things, right? Which is now the norm, at least,
Well, I think progression and growth in games has gotten a lot more popular, and so you just see that show up in a lot more places. And so it is refreshing when you see a game where it's like, oh, I just like Portal, right? No progression in Portal other than like getting to the next level, solving the puzzle.
Right.
There's no inherent growth. You could spend 5 hours solving the same puzzle, and if you aren't very smart, you haven't done anything really.
Yeah, but that's not multiplayer. I think the fascinating thing is that there's an entire subset of like cynically. The only one of the major things that's changed. Remember our eternal question of why do developers seem to spend so much time making sure you keep on playing their game.
Right.
Now there's a financial Perfect Dark didn't care.
Right.
You bought it and then that was it. So they didn't need to monetize incentivize with these we've talked about kind of these very simple psychological processes of reward completion and task completion and follow through and not leaving things undone.
Right.
That got monetized, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's just it, isn't it? I was trying to think of a counterpoint to that.
Well, you're right. They didn't need to do that. They had already sold you the game. You had the cartridge in your hand, and
yeah, it was inherently. I don't know. I don't want to just hate on that as an idea.
What, the idea of incentivizing people to play?
I guess.
I mean, there's a certain amount of satisfaction people get from progression and growth in games.
Yeah.
And people come back for that. I don't think it's inherently bad.
Yeah.
Like I said, I think it's popular right now. But because it's popular, you just kind of see it everywhere. And if you play a lot of different games, it sort of becomes, I don't know, it's like, what is this person's progression system? Right. Instead of just focusing on, how do I make this fun? There's a little more of a focus on, okay, how do I make the player feel like they're achieving something?
And stick around.
Right.
Because the purpose of progression systems is to keep you playing. I mean, it's to give you things. It's to, in theory, it's in the least cynical way possible. It is to lengthen and literally give depth and give more things to do and get more mileage out of the game for the player.
Sure.
As opposed to, so I guess that would be one critique of this kind of style where there is only so much you can do. But it also just makes me think of like the World of Warcraft effect, where like people like Blizzard, this gigantic studio, will spend months creating this incredibly intricate expansion, and then players will blow through it in like 4 days and be like, where the heck is all my content?
Right.
Like the classic, like just players will consume content faster than you can possibly ever make it.
Right.
Dynamic where like, I don't know, yeah, maybe there's something. That standard wasn't set back in the day, right? Like,
right.
Would anyone have been angry about the amount of content in Perfect Dark?
No.
Probably not.
No.
In fact, quite the contrary. It's easy to look up the reviews of the time and how it's regarded. I mean, it's considered a complete and utter masterpiece.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just an interesting time change too, in terms of, did we have longer attention spans? Did we have? Was it just a pure expectation thing?
Yeah.
Or is there, again, just inherent better, like, goodness or higher dignity to a simpler game that requires its user to throw more kind of emergent or complexity or self kind of imagination to project into it than all of this given incentive?
I think it's an interesting question. There is a sense, I think, of emptiness that you could come away with after playing this game for like 2 or 3 hours.
Yeah.
Which, because just you haven't accomplished anything, and like if you had a good time bonding with people, then like you had that, right?
Yeah.
You like, I enjoyed spending time with my friends,
right?
And that's what I walk away with. So the relationship is more of an incentive than anything in the game.
Yeah, totally.
But I think as games moved more and more toward individual play, they needed to give you things that were incentivizing you to come back and invest in and not feel empty after you played for 2 hours.
Yeah.
And so progression systems became more popular because there wasn't the sort of intrinsic motivation to go back to the game. They had to give you an external motivation from the game.
Yeah, totally. And that probably, I mean, it's as with most things that are complex. I'm guessing it's a combination of all these things that just kind of practical level of game design that you were talking about, the monetization level that I was talking about, and combined with just the advent of online gameplay, which kind of plays into both of those, obviously, in terms of isolating players a little bit more, but also, linking direct online experience to having to pay.
Right.
So, yeah, I'd see all of those things playing into it. But it is just an interesting little, and we do it imperfectly, I'm sure, but just some little bit of time travel, looking into the eyes of a gamer that would have seen this as a complete and utter, masterpiece.
Right.
Kind of the pinnacle of what that game could be at this time. Mm-hmm. Which is really cool. And I think, I don't know, I wonder if there's a lot to learn there from a developmental standpoint. Like, I wonder, like how a lot of times players or directors will show older films to their cast and crew before production starts to give a sense of what they're going for. Or a theme, or even just a feel to the film, kind of what to keep in mind in the back of their heads. I wonder if there'd be some goodness to that. I wonder how much that would translate, Like, how much can... I'm not being a developer.
Yeah.
How much could
you get away with?
How much could you learn, or how much could a modern FPS learn from going back and playing Perfect Dark, and then taking some of those lessons and applying it to a modern game?
Well...
Like, what would that game look... What would a modern version of this look like? You can't even imagine that, right? You just update the graphics.
Yeah, graphics seem like the biggest thing where you're like, oh, I need to update the graphics, but like...
If you update the graphics and then add the Halo controls.
Mm-hmm. It's an interesting
thought
experiment.
Satisfying?
Is that fun?
Yeah.
To do that?
I don't know.
So I think one of the things you need to focus on when you are going to have that sort of thought experiment is like, what was the experience that the developers wanted you to have originally, right? And like it's on the N64, right, which is like the only console at that time that had 4 controllers without an expansion port. So
that's a good point.
A lot easier to play with 4 people.
Yeah, that was a very communal system.
They clearly put a lot of time into the simulations, and like you could have 4 sims and 4 people. You could have 8 people on a map, which is totally unheard of.
Yeah, it would have been insane, right?
Yeah, just total chaos. The levels are really small and cramped, so you're always running into people. Yeah. There's always something happening, and
it's like almost a party game.
Yeah,
by design,
It plays a little like a party game. And so I think that you could make it happen with like update it. You could even maybe use network play, but I think you would have to keep a lot of that same philosophy. I would say that something like Team Fortress 2 would be the closest spiritual successor to the way that this plays.
Yeah, I think that's why I kind of touched on Overwatch, where it feels more like a arcade To compare it to Call of Duty or a modern shooter actually doesn't work in some ways because really the core gameplay design doesn't hold. Like, there's no way. Like, we're talking about that precision, that the way that you act as a entity in those games is just kind of night and day different than the way you'd be approaching a game like this. That's just, like I said, faster paced, more cramped, kind of designed for really quick death and combat. Very not too arcadey, or very arcadey, rather. And that kind of party element feels far more like Team Fortress or even Overwatch.
This is polar opposite, I will say, in terms of like the first-person shooter spectrum. Polar opposite of something like any battle royale game.
Yeah. In terms of
it's certainly PUBG. It's a little bit more like Fortnite, I would say, just because
Fortnite's more arcadey.
It's a little
anyway.
more arcadey, but yeah, something like PUBG is completely the opposite of this.
Yeah.
Very tactical, high stakes for death.
Yeah.
You try to kind of avoid people, and it's
Red Orchestra. You ever see that game? That was the sim. That is legitimately terrifying to play. Yeah, it is interesting that those. Well, it's also interesting to think of this could be another cast or a thought, but to jump from just the modern. The evolution of the FPS. If a game, why FPSs didn't go the direction of why it didn't evolve naturally from a game like this into why aren't like Team Fortress 2 and Overwatch the mainstays of the genre, and then the Call of Duties and Halos are the kind of like secondary ones.
Sure.
That why didn't they switch spots if the top of the line shooters of this time had more in common actually with what we see as more niche now.
Yeah.
Why that didn't remain mainstream as things ramped.
Yeah. Yeah, I think
the
thing
Halo
that comes to mind is Halo,
effect,
right?
Basically, was that
Blood Gulch was an incredibly popular level.
Yeah.
Think about how open it was, right? Like there are smaller levels, but I just remember playing like 8-player Halo on Blood Gulch, and that was a ton of fun. And something about being able to have that space was really significant. I mean, I need to reflect on it more to have a better answer to that. Yeah. But I think that's part of your answer there, is if you reflect on your experience with Halo 1 and just why it became popular to play larger levels.
Yep. Yeah.
Maybe it was too much chaos and people wanted to kind of swung back the other way to wanting to be able to plan out a location and snipe from a ridge or something.
Yeah. The whole idea. I remember I'm really trying to put myself back in that place of playing Halo for the first time and why it was so mind blowing. Outside of how I remember literally you just kept on talking about how smooth it felt. The word smooth just kept getting thrown around, and I didn't have the words for why it felt smooth, but it did. But yeah, past that, was it the fact that there was so much more tacticalness that could come into play in terms of you just had so much more control of what you were doing. You could be so much more specific about what and as we were playing here, despite the fact that there was a lot of movement and depth in terms of the different things you could do. In large part, it was like if I saw someone, I kind of point in that direction and pull the trigger.
Right.
I think the weapon design in Halo made a big difference too. Just the sheer the difference in the plasma weapons and the stickies and the difference between the Covenant and the having shields.
Yeah.
And the movement for sure.
Well, and so
having a floaty jump. I remember it feeling like it was just a new level of empowerment. Like when I get into it, like I was shocked I could do as many things as I could do. Getting to vehicles too was a huge thing. Kind of the third person aspect there. But there's so many different ways to play, and it felt so much more open and free and slick. I don't know. It really did feel. It felt like a new dimension being opened up.
Well, think about the weapons that you can use in Perfect Dark are mostly hit scan weapons, right?
That's true. Yeah.
There are a few projectile weapons.
The rocket launcher was projectile, and it was clunky AF.
That's where the game falls down, right? Is anytime you have something that explodes or sort of acts as a physics object, right? It's great with hit scans because for computationally that's super easy.
Yeah, it's
just like check to see does this ray intersect this bounding box, and it's like boom, it did.
Yeah.
So when you move to something like Halo, where you can have something like the Needler. Right, where there's all these projectile objects on the screen swarming after a moving target.
Yeah.
Right, like trying to do that on hardware like the N64 just would have been impossible.
Yeah.
But it's a really cool weapon.
Yeah.
And like even just like the delay from the sniper rifle if you're a long distance, it doesn't really function like a hit scan. You have to lead your target slightly, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, that was insane, especially on Blip. Yeah.
So I think all those things do make it feel like a more tactical game. than just sort of the arcadey, your reticle's going to lock onto your target, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and the quick kind of... and I've recalled Halo had a lockout on its respawn originally, too. Not long, like a 10-second thing. But as opposed to kind of the immediate just back in the grinder that Perfect Dark or GoldenEye would have had. That style type game, anyway. In terms of you just kind of death back. Getting killed in Halo had a little bit of weight to it. Which we've since moved away from, actually. Like, respawns are like the devil now. Like it's actually literally instant now. If you die, you can just hit a button and you're immediately back.
Yep, Overwatch does that. I will say, actually, with
Overwatch has some respawn.
Okay, well that's been a minute since I played Overwatch.
Yeah.
But I will say that God of War does do sort of a snap to aiming thing. The PS4 one does. There's actually there's a attack assist where you will like move your character slightly toward the target. If you swing and you're too far away to hit it, you'll sort of
you'll be
lunge
assisted.
A bit. Yeah, you'll lunge a bit. And so that's sort of the action game axe equivalent to this reticle auto aiming that we see.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure.
And it has the same effect, I would say, as like it makes you think less technically about what you're doing. Because like the odds are you're going to hit your target because the game's going to help you with the target.
Yeah.
So you really don't have to think super hard about like how you're aiming and...
It's really more just positional, just making sure you get the drop on someone or being in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, exactly.
What? I'm trying to think of the other auto aim assist. Oh, Battlefront. Battlefront 2, and the original ones, not the EA most recent ones. The original ones have an interesting kind of auto-aim lock-on feature that once you hit something once or twice, it'll lock onto that target and make it like a sticky reticule to their center.
Interesting.
So if you move a little bit or miss a little bit, it'll kind of auto-correct, which actually is really difficult for sniping, mostly. You actually need a free reticule for that in terms of being able to lead a little bit. And you can imagine that would really mess it up. Or just anything that interacts with really precise aiming.
Right.
That makes it a lot harder to get headshots and stuff. But in any case, I was just thinking in terms of why an auto aim is so much more significant in a game like that. I think it's mostly just the lack of precision and the lack of. I think another problem too, a little bit, is I'm trying to think even just in terms of 3 dimensions as we talked about with the kind of bullet hallway that they can turn into if it's a lot less. You have a lot less freedom of movement. Of your reticle, that is just harder to gauge depth, it's harder to gauge kind of motion and where you are with flatter textures and less lighting back in the day, so it's a little bit more difficult to get a sense of how your angles are kind of interacting with things, as opposed to, modern day physics and games. It makes it a lot less, precise.
Yeah, and you're right, you can't do scale, really. You can't do distance that way.
Yeah.
All the hallways being very closed in Perfect Dark is very intentional, so that you're constantly, the game's only having to render a few polygons.
Yeah, that's true.
You're not going to be able to see anywhere close to the scale of something like a Blood Gulch, where you could snipe someone from across the map. The biggest room that we saw was that 4-tower room in Area 52.
Yeah. That was interesting. And so that was an interesting thing, too, because, like, I think part of this is just skill in terms of my inability to really firefight, but like most of those engagements came down to like people would die when they left the hallway. Like there was very little open gunplay like in the area. Like the really frantic like gunplay that can happen in Halo.
Right.
In open where you're all like jumping around and lethality is rather low and you have shields and kind of the better player will come out on top. Like when you entered the area, you probably were going to die pretty quick in Perfect Dark. The game really isn't designed for big, huge open conflicts like that.
Yeah, because then aiming and sort of, I guess gunplay becomes a lot more important instead of just like, point your gun down this hallway and fire.
Because I mean,
if someone's in the hallway, they'll die.
Yeah. In a similar way, to an extent, to Call of Duty. But you can't have big open maps in Call of Duty. They act differently. You have more options with how to interact with them than you do in the Perfect Dark.
Yeah.
And I still don't know what Perfect Dark refers to.
Well, that'll just have to remain a mystery for you and for our listeners.
In some ways,
it's lost to time.
It is.
We'll never know.
Perfectly dark.
And that's a great place to
me. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you guys for listening, checking us out.
More fun than expected.
More fun than
more unexpectedly
fun.
less than I was thinking it might be.
We're going to shut this off. Have a good night, guys.
Peace.